Wendy on the screen? Here she comes. There she is. There she is. So first, Wendy Birdsall. Wendy is president of the Lincoln Chamber of Commerce. I had the pleasure of meeting Wendy back in 2014 when I relocated to Nebraska. And when you look at the Lincoln economy, clearly her work is evident and quantifiable, no question. And not only that, she's a nice person, and she just does great things. David Brown, oh my goodness, I could talk about David forever. David and I go back over 20 years from our days in Greenville, South Carolina, when I was with Ford Credit. David was president of the Greenville Chamber of Commerce, and I am so honored to be reconnected with him back here in the great state of Nebraska. And then my friend Bryan Slone. Bryan and I have traveled together. We've traveled the state. I've watched him lead and help support the mission of Grow Nebraska. I've watched him, and he just has a dynamic background. If you don't know, you Google Bryan Slone, and you'll have a clear understanding of who this man is. And one of the things that I can say about all three of them is they live their lives doing more good. You know, if you know the core of Wendy Birdsall, David Brown, and Bryan Slone, they live their lives doing more good. And that is evident in the work that they do as they grow the state of Nebraska. And that's also evident in who they are and what they do and their emphasis on culture. So without further ado, I'll kind of dive into our conversation. So folks, we've heard from business leaders over the past day and a half. They leverage their business as a force to do good. And today we're celebrating a few Black businesses that have similar priorities and purpose. The Nebraska business community has an intrinsic sense of community orientation, and it's really in the fabric and the DNA of who we are. So I'll ask our esteemed panel, where does this deep commitment come from, and why is it important to the overall success of our state? And so you all may speak as the spirit may move you.
You know, I think the core of Nebraskans is, they have this very strong work ethic. They care about their community. They care about their neighbors, and they care about the success of all of that. And so I think that then is magnified into the businesses that we have in our state, and they walk the talk. They feel it's very important that they are difference makers. There's an old, let me just throw this in. I love this old Greek proverb quote that a society grows great when old men plant trees whose shade they know they shall never sit in. And I think that Nebraskans epitomize that. And I think that couldn't be more true of the folks that we do business with here.
Geez, Wendy, we're supposed to follow a Greek quote. Really? I mean, didn't Tony say this was just going to be a nice, friendly conversation? Start throwing ancient Greek quotes in this. Geez.
Oh, you've heard that one before.
I know, but geez, I don't have my own quote to deal with. I will tell you that, almost 20 years ago when I came here, the research that I'd done about the community pointed to a ridiculously engaged corporate leadership community, doing things that I'd never seen their counterparts do in other communities that I had lived in. So when I was interviewing for the position, I had an opportunity to talk to the top 10 or 15 business leaders in Omaha. And I asked them all the same real question. And at the time, I thought maybe the chamber had coached them all, that they knew I was going to ask them this question. But they didn't. And I asked a real simple question. Why do you do this? I mean, you've got plenty of things to keep you busy. You can engage in just running your business or in your industry or whatever it might be. Why is it that you choose to make a difference where you live and really roll up your sleeves and get involved in running campaigns and chairing boards and donating ridiculous amounts of money to projects? And they all told me the same thing, which I thought was suspicious at the beginning, but at the end I realized, that's part of the DNA. They all said, because, it's all about making this a better place for our kids and our grandkids. And so if you think about that as the motivation for engagement, you wake up every day passionate about making things a better place for your family, and basically it spins off to everything else. I think that's why Nebraska is this very special place. I think that same thing applies all the way across the state. If there's a business output from it, that's great. If there's a return on the investment to their companies, that's just icing on the cake. But the real reason to do it is you want to make this a better place to live for everybody. And that sold me on why I should come to Omaha and Nebraska to do this work.
Hey, Tony, before I get into this, I got to tell you, I always thought you were the most dynamic speaker I knew. But now having listened to Kim, sorry, pal, you're second.
I agree with that, just so you know.
I think Nebraska is such a unique place, and several of us have lived in lots of different places. But I think it's a product of its history, which is, as a young state, it was a place where immigration founded this state, waves of immigration from all over the world. And, I'm only 2 generations away from a grandfather who showed up in a horse-drawn wagon with nothing. And neighbors help neighbors. And that was really the foundation of the state. It's a very populous state in the sense of pride in community, and the community steps out and works with each other. We've seen it the last 2 years. I mean, in addition to the COVID pandemic, the prior year was the 100-year floods for Nebraska, and you saw it from community to community. I think it's in Nebraskans' DNA. And like David, when I moved to Omaha 25 years ago, the first thing the business leaders did was grab me by the arm and said, "This is how we do it here." And you are part of the community, and that's an expectation that goes with being in business. And so I just think it's part of the DNA of this state, and I see it across the state, and you do too. It's a special place, like nowhere else I've ever been.
I've lived in 13 cities and 10 states, and I've done business around the world. And Bryan, I would agree with you. The level of cooperation and alignment, you always hear me say we all wear the same jersey. It's just absolutely amazing. So let's segue into a conversation about capitalism, because at the end of the day, capitalism gets a bad reputation, and we all believe that doing more good doesn't mean that you don't make money. And so when we look at Main Street capitalism, like we have in Nebraska, it builds strong families and communities. How do we fix the narrative that capitalism is bad, especially among our young people who have started to gravitate in ways and in places that may not be healthy for our state?
Go ahead, Bryan.
Let me jump in, and it's a story, Tony, that I was the state's slowest high school receiver with the worst hands ever. But what I do remember growing up is then that my mom would send me to the hardware store on Saturday morning, and all the business people from town, in this small town I grew up in, would be down at the lumber yard having a cup of coffee, and they would have all been at the game on Friday night, and they would all have comments on my performance on Saturday morning. I knew the business people growing up, and I had that, and that really goes to Kim's point. I had that interaction as a young person with the business people in my community, and that's why communities are so important. I do think that we've gotten away from that. I know in raising my own children, their lives became so specialized and so busy. I did not see that same sort of interaction with business people as they grew up. Shame on me. I think that's important. And so if you ask me, where do we need to go, and why do people have perceptions of the corporate world that really aren't true, I think it's because they don't have that interaction. And business needs to do a better job of reaching out to our young people. I'll leave it at that.
I think also we need to talk about it. We are the business ambassadors, if you will, and we need to tell the story. We as Nebraskans tend not to brag and beat our chests and say, "Hey, look at what I've done." We tend to go about our business. We do it, get it done. We give back to our community, and we forget how important it is to tell those stories. We've got a number of them across the state that you could point to that are going above and beyond and doing things that have absolutely nothing to do with their core business, but they are reaching out and making a difference in their community and to the people of the state. So I think we need to talk about it. We don't do a good job of giving a good impression or talking about the great things that we're doing.
Yeah, Tony, I think in a lot of ways we forget that capitalism enables companies to make money, which, by the way, I think we're the only civilization ever created that actually has a term for making money and making profits. And that when you make money, when you make a profit, that enables you to reinvest the excess into things like your community or into better working conditions for your workers or for better amenities in the community you live in. And I think that's the part of capitalism that's never talked about. That absent the ability to profit, you don't have the dollars to reinvest in your people or in your companies. I mean, all the media likes to show is the largesse on the other end of the spectrum, where the money is being captured by the very, very few, and then they're squandering those dollars instead of using it for community good. I think in Nebraska in particular, capitalism has this really interesting sort of twist to it, where profit is expected to be shared in the community that you are in, and with improving the opportunities for your workers. I just don't think that narrative is talked much about. I mean, Wendy is right that we as chambers should be promoting the notion that profit is not a dirty word. That capitalism really does matter. It enables us to see all the great quality of life investments that we see in the state. So maybe it's about us creating our own narrative. Maybe it's us using our own voices and our own mechanisms that we have in our organizations to tell the tale if the national media or the broader public media won't tell that story. It won't get to as broad an audience, but it will get to an audience at least. I was fortunate, Bryan, that my son Elijah is really likes to do chamber stuff, and so ever since he was old enough to realize he liked talking to people, he would accompany me at damn near everything. And so he did have the chance to sort of experience what talking to business people was like. We realized about age 10 we couldn't shut him up. He was going to go find somebody to talk to every chance that he got. And so both of my sons are comfortable in this environment because we brought them up helping out in the old chamber volunteer role of getting engaged and talking to people. We can't do that with everybody, but I do believe that more and more experience with business people who they see as people, not as these people in headlines or folks they just can't reach, but just hear those stories that we all hear at our Hall of Fame dinners and lunches and those kinds of things. Those stories will make a difference because they see these folks came from nothing and made themselves into something, and they can do that too.
Hey, Tony, if I could just jump in just really quickly. I think one of the things that we've all got to be careful of these days is it's the media world has created a world where it's a world of narratives. Yeah. And the narratives don't have to be true. And so one of the narratives that has gone on forever last decade is that the young people aren't as ambitious as prior generations. I had the opportunity to teach at the University of Nebraska for 4 years, and every night I'd come home and my wife would say, "How was it?" And I said, "You cannot believe how impressed I am with these young people. I mean, I'm just thoroughly impressed on day after day after day." And it really goes to Kim's prior point. When you interact with young people, you realize how talented this generation really is. It's the same with entrepreneurs. And the Business Hall of Fames, each of our 3 organizations have these Hall of Fames. You go to any one of those ceremonies, and every one of those very successful business people has been this community leader that I always come away from those things going, I got to up my game. I'm not even in the same ball game these people are. We just got to connect people and connect the dots.
Yeah. And Bryan, you are absolutely right. I don't know. We've talked about it many times. Why is it that people focus and commiserate and want to continue that negative narrative? It may come from self-preservation. You don't want to experience that, but it does when you turn on the news, when you pull out the paper, when you pull up your news feed on your computer. The headlines are the negative things, And so that gets ingrained in people's brains. And it's the first thing, oh yeah, capitalism's bad because look at what just happened. Well, David brought up so many good points about if we didn't have these companies that are profiting, we wouldn't have the ability to reinvest in the community and make these things we all know and love materialize. So it's about the narrative. It's about reframing it and being a positive force.
Hey, Tony, there's a comment in the chat about capitalism isn't good or bad. We just have bad capitalists right now.
Yeah.
I think that that's as inaccurate a statement as saying all capitalists are good. I mean, I think that there are some people who do remarkable things in this world, and there are people that do terrible things in this world. And our job is to make sure that there are a lot more doing good than there are doing bad. So I would suggest that there are some headlines, more headlines on the bad side than the good side. If you balance it out, I would contend that, yeah, there's some bad ones out there, but there's far more people doing good than there are doing bad. They're capitalists in this market. They're trying to do the right things. In Nebraska, they tend to do more things good.
Absolutely. Absolutely. You know, that was one of the reasons, that was the impetus of the book that I had a chance to put together, Something in the Water, because it really tells those stories and helps to create that narrative. And what I will promise you is that every last one of those folks in the book is a capitalist. But at the end of the day, when you look at the good they all do in this community, that's the narrative that we need to continue to push and continue to tell those stories. You know, that leads me to a segue into a conversation about talent and economic development. How do we attract talent? How do we retain talent? And when we start thinking about the younger generation, what do we think we need to do better as a business community to be more purpose-driven? Because clearly we can see that our younger generation being purpose-driven is an important factor. So what do we do to marry capitalism and purpose-driven, and what do we do in that vein to help attract and retain talent?
Tony, I might jump in on this one first, just because it's something that's near and dear to all of our hearts, and I think we all have something going on with this. I'll tell you that our young professionals group at the Chamber is a perfect example of what we can be doing all across the country. When we started it in 2003, we thought we were going to get a group of people that were going to talk to us about those sort of physical changes in the community that would make it a nicer place for them to live. You know, later bar hours, more transportation shuttles, maybe more restaurants, more event venues, all those kind of good things. And it didn't take them long at all to create a disillusion about that for us, because we were clearly dealing with a group of young professionals who wanted to make a difference. They wanted to be involved in strategic decision making. They wanted to be involved in changing the community for the better. They wanted to engage as a major mover in the community. Now in Omaha, nothing really major strategic happens without somebody calling us and saying, how do we plug into the YP group and find out what they're thinking about this and how they can give us input. We have a very aggressive effort to get young professionals appointed to committees and commissions. We have young professionals on all of our committees. We've got 2 designated spots in our executive committee for young professionals and 2 on our board of directors as well. I mean, we're all in, realizing that attracting talent isn't really the biggest part of the challenge. It's keeping the talent that we've got here. And the best way, we believe, of keeping young people in our community is to engage them in building a better community, making the place what they want it to be and what they can see. So inspire them to create the kind of future that needs to be created. To do that, the young professionals and all the literature tell us what it takes. You got to have this ridiculously cool community that they're proud to live in. But they also got to have career opportunities that show that they can grow in their careers and that they can be in a place that they're proud of and be around other people of a variety of different cultures, ethnicities, genders, orientation that they believe and we've all come to see makes us a stronger place to live. So it comes down to, if you want people, you focus on who you got. You got to figure that the place has to be right and the career opportunities have to be there just to keep what we have already. If then word of mouth causes the attraction of talent to come here, even if we're intentional about it, it's all going to start with keeping what we have already, keeping them excited and passionate about our community, and then using that as a tool to attract additional people from the outside.
I couldn't agree more, Dave. And our YPG groups are very similar. We've grown stronger as a result of each other. And we need to entice the people that we have. We need to tell them why, quit selling to the people out here. We need to sell to the people that are here and tell them why it's important. I know growing up here in Lincoln, I had no idea the opportunities that were here. And shame on whomever else at that time didn't look to try and entice us to stay here. And so the Young Professionals Group, I think, goes a long way in doing that. They want to be part of something exciting. They want to say, hey, I participated in that. And, we've also gone through that evolution with our Young Professionals Group. We thought at first, it'll just be a committee of the chamber. Well, we were so wrong with that. We weren't going to go in and tell them what to do. They were going to tell us and give us the feedback of how we can make this community better. And we just need to continue to feed them and give them what they need to make them successful. And I think we've done that. Omaha has done that in exponential form. And we're doing the same thing here right in Lincoln. And I know there is a Young Professionals Group across the state that we're both helping support. And it's so important that we keep not just the people in Lincoln and Omaha, but the folks from Western Nebraska as well, engaged in their community and want to stay here and build it.
Wendy, if we do that work, we'll actually be able to keep the biggest challenge of our in-migration, out-migration challenge in front of us that says we got started at home with keeping who you got. But we all know that the population of the state and our communities isn't growing fast enough. And even keeping a larger percentage of what leaves isn't enough for us to be able to grow fast enough to have the population that'll create the labor force that will make it so companies can grow. So we still need to bring people in from the outside. I think we start at home, as we've both described, but then there has to be an effort to say we have to grow our population really inorganically. We just leave it the way it is. It'll grow to, I don't know, I know the Omaha number, it'll grow to about 1.2 million people by 2040, just because we continue to grow about 1% a year. But we think we need to grow by 250,000 people more than that by 2040 in order to meet all the labor force demands that our companies are going to have. So we got to do some inorganic growth here, which means we got to keep more of what we got, and we got to bring more from the outside. And that's where place and branding and knowledge from the outside, and asking people that are here, would you sell this as a place to live and work to friends and relatives and colleagues in your industry, and using that key resource we have, the people that are here, as a major selling point to bring more people in from the outside.
So
Absolutely. I'm sorry, Brian. I would just want to emphasize that last point. We need to be ambassadors, and we need for our young professionals to be brand ambassadors for our community and telling everyone they know. It goes a long way in enticing those boomerangs, trying to get people that have that connection to Nebraska to looking at us again through those brand ambassadors.
Yeah.
So Tony, you've heard me talk about this many, many times. Without question, talent acquisition, talent retention is our number one issue in the state. There's not even a close second. And that's hard for a tax guy like me to say, because the world is taxes for me, but there's not even a close second to talent retention acquisition. As I've said before, I don't know where the next Warren Buffett lives right now. He or she is 8 or 10 years old, and they might live in Wahoo, or they might live in Imperial, Nebraska, or they might live in Denver, or they might live in Coos Bay, Oregon, or they might be in Glen Arm, Maryland. I just don't know where that next Warren Buffett is, but I want that Warren Buffett to be in Nebraska, building a business and then doing the philanthropic things that Mr. Buffett does do. But I think when you ask what do businesses need to do, one of the things is we need to meet these people where they are, and they're here. When I give speeches across the state, there's a lot of people that look like me that come to my speeches. But the people we really need to meet, we need to meet them where they are. We need killer apps. We need new killer apps that connect our businesses directly to students across the country. And it's not just the current social media apps and not just the narratives and advertisements. We need, and there's people developing them, real apps that connect real people in the business world to students across the country. Because in today's world, there's no reason that that can't happen. And so I think technology platforms are part of our answer. And I think as a state, we need to invest very hard in technology platforms where you have a student or a young person who can design their own experiences in getting to know Nebraska businesses and Nebraska careers and Nebraska educational opportunities. Employers will pay for education if we can get the right talent to the state. The opportunities are immense, but there's a technology aspect to this as well.
Bryan, I agree. There is a technology aspect, and I'll say this: that's economic inclusion, which is what Kim talked about, is so critical. And David, you touched upon it, and that's really an acquisition strategy. I and Kim, we're both a part of an acquisition strategy. Cabela's had the foresight to say, listen, we want to become more diverse. We're looking for talent, and they use a search firm. And I think sometimes search firms get a bad name, but at the end of the day, sometimes if you don't have the right connectivity, I don't view a search firm as a cost. I am very grateful that Cabela's used Russell Reynolds, because I had no intention on coming to Nebraska. And that's not a negative thing. It just wasn't on my radar. And so when Cabela's hired Russell Reynolds and I initially received a phone call about coming to Nebraska, it still wasn't as appealing. You've heard me say our story is undertold and undersold. There's a level of humility in our state that is important, but we also have to be able to tell our stories. And what I'll say is we have to be able to brag some about some of our accomplishments. So economic inclusion is important. Don't be afraid to invest in recruiters. Think about the HBCUs, because as we look to become more diverse and more inclusion, and of course, economic inclusion is extremely important as we grow and really create the culture in our state that we need to continue.
Hey, Tony, can I come back at you with one thing in terms of going back
Please.
to a question?
Yes, sir.
Because I left the state when I was 24 years old, and went to Washington, D.C. and to Berlin. I mean, one of the things we've got to talk about too is you talked about this generation, this younger generation, wanting to make a difference and wanting to make a difference at a younger age, and wanting a purpose-driven life. And you know, in my Gallup strengths, mission is number 2 on my Gallup strengths. So I get it. My bottom line is I can't do something unless I think I'm doing good. I just won't stick with a job. The wonderful thing about Nebraska, and particularly our smaller communities across the state, if you're 25 or 27 and you're an entrepreneur or a business person or just a person looking for a job, you can make a huge difference in those communities. You can be impactful in those communities. You can run for city council. You can be mayor. We have state senators that are in that 30-year-old group. When I moved to Washington, D.C. as a 24-year-old, I couldn't make an impact in D.C. In a big city, it wasn't going to happen for me. And even in Berlin, which was 8 million people, particularly with my German, it wasn't going to happen. But in towns across Nebraska, if you're looking for the opportunity not only to have quality of life, but the ability to make an impact in other people's lives, I can't think of a better place than the communities across our state.
Absolutely. Absolutely, Bryan. You know, we often talk about here in Nebraska, you have people of goodwill that are really kind, which is one of the tenets of do more good. And you have access to them. I've never been in a state where people of great means will so easily give you their cell phone number. In most places, you're going to go through 5 or 10 gatekeepers. They'll set an appointment. The appointment may materialize, but most of the time it'll be canceled or pushed back. So, Bryan, to your point, the access that young people have here is just absolutely incredible. So, as we, I'm going to think about, closing out here. It is amazing that the work that chambers do across the state, but what role do you think institutions like the chamber should continue to do in educating businesses and business owners about the importance of stakeholders, and really more so the importance of becoming more a part of this do more good movement And then what role should Do More Good play in spreading that narrative around the state? Now, this question is really more about intentionality. How do we be more intentional about what we do so that we can create real change?
You know, Tony, this past year has given us some unique opportunities to sort of respond to that question in real life. You know, when the George Floyd killing happened in Minneapolis about a year ago, you know, we had already had in place an organization that the Chamber called the CEOs for Code. Code stands for our commitment to opportunity, diversity, and excellence. And it was a recognition from our 2040 visioning process that population demographics were changing across the state, and they were going to continue to change over the next 20 years. And that our companies and our communities probably weren't ready for the demographic shift that we were going to see. And so we built really a 20-year strategy that said, how can we help all of our businesses be better about hiring a more diverse group of employees, how to create internal cultures, and then how do we work on the community culture to respond. That group gets together every quarter, and they started doing it in 2018 or 2019. And it just so happened that the Friday or the Wednesday following the George Floyd incident, we already had a scheduled CEOs for Code meeting. And prior to that Friday debacle, we had 50 people signed up for that group. By Wednesday, we had 152 people attend the meeting. And by a week later, we had 300 companies that signed a We Will pledge that basically said, enough is enough. The business community and our community at large believe that Omaha is the kind of place where discrimination should not take place any longer for any reason. And we're going to work as hard as we can as the business community and business leaders and community leaders to make sure that discrimination doesn't show up in our community any longer. Now, to me, that's a role chambers can play. I mean, if indeed you're laying the information out in front of business leaders, and then they take that up as stakeholders in the community and say, we are going to lead, and we're going to have other people engage with us to solve this major problem in our community, I think that's a great role that chambers can play. It didn't take a crisis to get them to move towards this in smaller numbers, but once the crisis got large and it was clear something needed to be done, I think that they jumped on board. And so whether it's Wendy's group or Bryan's or any of the chambers across the state, you know, we all have business leaders that want to do good, that want to make a difference. And when they realize that it's something they uniquely can do, they gather around. So I think chambers should be about the business of building communities. I think we should identify those things that are our strengths and enhance them. I think we should identify those things where we have opportunities and start moving the community towards solving those opportunities. And don't be afraid to stand up and say, this is broken, this isn't working. And so let's put a group of people together to help solve that. Those are roles that chambers should play, whether they're here in Nebraska or around the country. We are change makers, we're catalysts, and we need to accept that role and know that our business leaders expect us to do that, even in the face of some challenges. So whether it's engaging our young people or engaging our existing business leaders, you know, there's a role chambers can play in moving them in the right direction by providing that direction and the issues that are out there, and then giving them a mechanism for responding.
David, I think you're spot on, and I think exactly what we should be doing. And then I would take it one more step, and that is to celebrate our successes and celebrate those businesses like you do in your business awards. Bryan has business awards. We do as well. But I think you need to celebrate that and reward the efforts of those that are making that huge contribution. And people then will want to repeat that and will see the value in the commitment that they've made and want to do and want to emulate it.
Tony, I gave an address. We had a convention last week of Midwestern chambers up in South Dakota, and I addressed that group and basically concluded that the litmus test on a chamber should be when your community has a life event, and that life event may be many things to many different communities, but where it is that big elephant in the room for your community. The question for chambers are you the place where people convene, people of all colors, of all backgrounds, of all experiences, of all political views? Are you the place that they convene to solve the problem? And that's sort of the fundamental mission of chambers. And you know, I'm fortunate to be with David and Wendy because they do that as well as anybody that I know of. I'm trying to learn from these two, but that's what chambers are. And I encourage everybody to get involved in their chamber because that's the place. Whatever your thoughts or images of chambers are, that's our core mission. I get up every morning and my mission isn't for companies to make more money. My mission is very clear. Are we providing the best economic opportunity in the world? Not only for the employers, but for the workers, because our workers are, in fact, the number one issue for all our employers. And so are we building strong communities with the best economic opportunity in the world? And that's our mission. Are we convening the right people around the right table to make that happen? And that's what chambers do.
Bryan, you know, your comment about bringing other people around the table is a key point that I really needed to include in my remarks too. You know, my favorite line is that we accomplish so much more together. Right now, the chamber has 70 plus partners in the community that we work with. And some of them would surprise many of the folks that are on this call probably because they're not your traditional business organizations. These are organizations that have clear missions to solve challenges that are part of that quality of life matrix that we are always looking at. And it makes no sense for the chamber to stand up and say, yep, we're going to lead that effort too, when there are already really effective organizations in the community that can make that difference. The goal, though, is that we are able to support them. So, you know, it isn't about the chamber having to lead every time. It is about, as Bryan says, maybe convening a whole host of pretty disparate groups that people might be surprised about, and not necessarily doing it except to make sure we find out who's going to lead, who's going to participate, who's going to follow, and how the business community can support. So I would suggest that groups like Do More Good, or just fill in the blank, any organization that wants to do better, make the state better, make our people stronger, better educated, improve inclusivity and diversity, all the things you want to do. And at the top of it, make sure the state keeps growing. They're welcome into the pool. And we're just trying to figure out the role we can all play so that we're not duplicating efforts, spending money more than once on the same issue, targeting and being prioritized about how do we get things done. So this is about everybody being engaged, and to the extent that chambers can be a leader in some of that is great, and we enjoy it. But we also realize we're not the only game in town. We should be supporting some of those folks that are making a difference in areas that are outside of our mission, but important to the quality of life in the state.
That's great, David. And listen, in closing, let me say that the chambers have played such an important role in the Do More Good topic and the Do More Good tenets. I mean, these three leaders have an abundance mindset. They're all servant leaders. They're all kind people. They share the narrative. Important that everyone on the call be very intentional about quantifying and putting metrics to the Do More Good movement, and really think about how you share that narrative. And as David said, it's not just about organic growth, but it is about acquisition. It is about how do we attract talent to come to the state so that we create a great life for us all. So businesses solve problems. That's what we do. These are business leaders that are on this call, and you have such a great opportunity to make a real impact, specifically around culture and specifically around what is necessary to create a real strong Do More Good movement. We are the middle of everywhere. Our story's been undertold and undersold, and it's time for us to shout it from the mountaintops. And Jay and Graham, we really appreciate this opportunity. So with that being said, Graham, I'll turn it back over to you.